So Lux recently sent me their new upgraded version of their lag screws. It has this hex portion, which actually makes driving these in quite easy and probably much easier than the old version. As you can see from my example here in my project, there is a little trick to them. You need to have a left-handed and a right-handed, one on each side. If you don't, you're unable to tighten them. The other thing to know is planning how much of this portion you want to show. As you can see, I try to bury most of it into the post because after you crimp them, I didn't really want to see the crimp anymore. In order to make sure most of them look as uniform as possible, I finally found a good way of measuring. So I utilized the little line in the middle of the screw as my mark to drive into the post, as you can see on the right post over here. Once that is accomplished, I will then place the cable and seat it, which goes to this line, and crimp them into place. Depending on your tools, you can use a wrench, or I found that using a torque wrench here is much quicker at driving these in. I will get them into place on each side of the post, and then I will place the cable. Fortunately, placing the cable on one side is not a big deal, as there's no measurement needed, as long as you have enough to cut off afterwards. The next part is actually pretty important, as you must measure and find a length that will be consistent. I have found that after placing it just approximately halfway into the middle of the post, I mark it and cut at that place, as I have found this gives me the necessary length I need to both tighten the cable and drive the screws into the post enough to hide the crimping. I have now crimped both sides, and you can see I have quite a bit of slack here. The object now is to continue to screw in both sides of these screws, going back and forth. As I screw in one side, you will legitimately see the wire start to unravel. After 4 or 5 half screws on the left side here, I can see the wire unraveling. This is a good sign to switch to the other side and tighten the wire back down until it looks back to its original form. While doing this, the screws are being driven into the posts and the wire is starting to tighten up. I've now done the right, and I'll go back to the left now. I typically found you have to go back and forth about 2 or 3 times, just repeating, opening the wire and screwing it on this side, and then closing it back down on the other side. I'm now getting pretty close. I've only have a little bit of slack left, and the screws are driven pretty well into each side. Usually at this point it only takes a couple more on each side to finish the job. And I will say, when I'm done, this is as solid as it can be. no slack, and is the goal, and the wire looks as uniform as it can. This was a result of too much wire being given to the screw. In fact, if I recall, instead of going to the middle of the post, I went to the end of the post thinking that it would drive it in. Unfortunately, I never could get it in, and I lost out, and I didn't have enough screw. In addition, I also have one where be careful not to screw too much on one side, thinking you'll even it out, because if it kinks at all, you can see this one never was able to reform its original shape, so it's best to go back and forth pretty evenly. Thanks, and that's my demonstration.